By the winter of 1999, I began to think that I was not such a hopeless case. I didn't have to call Omar anymore, he called me. He schooled me in the glorious victories of the Arabs, beyond Badr, the early victories and the early caliphs, the triumph over the Persians at Qadisiyah and over the Byzantines at Yarmouk, how Islam expanded through the Middle East and established a caliphate. It was all new to me. I told him proudly of my ancestor who fought at Yarmouk, but I never really knew before what the battle was about. He talked especially about the role of the second caliph, Omar. Omar was great because of his discipline, his humility, and because he rejected anything showy and ostentatious. He lectured me about the Battle of Hattin, which I'd read about in the National Geographic magazine. It had a picture of the horns of Hattin, so I knew about Saladin's triumph over the Crusaders. But the victory of the Egyptian Mamluks over the Mongols in the 13th century, I'd never heard about that. He always came back to Badr, the first big triumph of Muhammad over the rich and powerful empire of the Quraysh. He loved to tell about the few hundred raiders ambushing the great caravan. It came about by appointment, he said. God adjudicated the outcome, sent down 3,000 angels led by Gabriel to slay the infidels. The whole thing struck me as magical thinking. It's a great story, Karima, don't you think? It's world history, right? One time he said, the Sheikh often quotes the Prophet, quote, I wish I could raid and be slain, and then raid and be slain, and then raid and be slain, he would say. Omar was so passionate about that kind of stuff, but it always made me feel kind of uncomfortable. When I asked him who he was talking about, he was embarrassed. He averted his eyes, I remembered now, which he never, ever did. Oh, he's just a good Muslim, he said. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have mentioned him. Just a rich man with good intentions, who made some pretty bad mistakes. We're not sure of him, I can tell you. Who is he? I asked. And Omar said, never mind, Sami, I shouldn't have brought him up. It's what the Prophet says that's important. Come on, Omar, what's the big deal? Just tell me his name. And then he told me, Karima, Sheikh Osama bin Laden. So now you know, I had no clue who this guy was. Anyway, Omar didn't really want to talk about the Sheikh. He turned the conversation back to me. Who was I, he asked. What did I stand for? What did I want out of life? I felt queasy every time he started grilling me like that. One time he put it to me this way, don't you want to participate in the struggle of your generation? And another time, you grew up in the shadow of Sabra and Shatila. How can you not see that Islam is under attack? Isn't that Palestinian hellhole just a few blocks from your parents' apartment? I had never really paid attention, I had to admit. And the pilot thing, he was very interested in that. What is it about flying that so appeals to you, Sami? Is it because you think it's so beautiful up there, so clean, not messy like down here on the ground? If you flew over Beirut, I suppose Sabra and Shatila would look just like the rest of it. He started calling me the Phoenician. You think of yourself as a Phoenician rather than a Palestinian. But Phoenicia is a dead civilization, Sami, and Phoenicians were traitors and hustlers and cheaters. We are all Palestinians now. With each session, I was becoming less and less sure I wanted to be there. And yet I wanted to prove myself to him. His grasp of history and the Quran was amazing. His passion and commitment were irresistible. When he was moved, I was moved too. I could never doubt his sincerity, even right up to now, even as I'm really struggling. I felt like a nonentity next to him. Nothing, no dreams, no ambitions. Spoiled rich kid living off daddy, unable to stand on his own 2 feet. I stopped trying to joke around with him, and he began to compliment my progress. I was proud. We slept on straw mats on the floor in mud huts, and were told that the Sheikh did likewise, for he wished to live simply and be alert and ready like the Prophet himself. The rules were posted on the walls of the barracks. Follow Islamic principles. Pray 5 times a day. Be punctual for food. Clean beds and tents once a week. No arguments, no insults, no drugs. Go to bed early. On the wall of one classroom was a sign that read, 2 illegitimate reasons for leaving jihad: love of the world and hatred of death. If you leave jihad, then God will take away mercy from you. A number of recruits left during these days of experimentation, and then we were taught to kill. In earlier drills, we had practiced thrusting a knife into a straw man as we shouted out, "Die, unbeliever! Die! Kill, kill, kill!" Then one day the instructor handed out long knives and took us to a sheep barn where there was a pen with some 30 newborn lambs. He grabbed one by the scruff of its neck. As its high-pitched wail filled the rafters, he handed it to Atta. "Okay," he said, "slit its throat." Atta stared at him blankly for a second, and then he did the deed with dispatch. Fatfat followed, and then Omar. By the time he came down the line to me, there was blood everywhere. I was handed a lamb. I raised my knife and then fainted dead away on the straw. The Syrian led me through the huts and across a dusty parade ground until we arrived at the administration building. Inside, the escort knocked on a door. A commanding voice inside called out his permission to enter. The Syrian whispered in my ear. "Rely on God," he said, as he nudged me forward and closed the door behind me. There before me sat Mohammed Atef. I recognized him immediately from the pictures I had seen in Hamburg in Omar's apartment, and from descriptions of him in Camp Gossip. He was referred to as the Emir of all emirs. I understood that long ago he had been an Egyptian policeman and an Air Force officer and a founding father of the organization, a veteran of the Russian jihad. As chief of military operations to the Sheikh, they said he had planned the attacks on the African embassies. Once he had even been a professional volleyball player. I had heard that he was an excellent equestrian, though not as good as the Sheikh himself. He was seated cross-legged on a cushion behind a low coffee table before me. His head was erect, shoulders held back, chin high. He wore a white turban. His deep-set eyes were hooded beneath thick eyebrows, and even though his beard was dark and full, extending down below his shoulder bone, his face was brown and smooth. The collar of his white robe was open, and over it was a dark, sleeveless vest. Resting against the wall beside him was a Kalashnikov. "Salam, Abu Tariq al-Lubnani," he said, motioning for me to take a seat on the floor opposite him. "I am Mohammed Atef." "Yes, Ya Sayyidi Nam," I said. "I have heard many things about you." "I welcome you to the Emirate of the Faithful," he said. "You have nearly finished the first phase of your training, I understand." "I wish to apologize for my performance, Eminence," I said. "I'm not much of a fighter. I would understand entirely if the organization deems me unqualified." "What did you expect when you came here, Abu Tariq? Rose water and lovely ladies?" "I expected the training would be hard. I did not realize how soft I am. I am a graduate student. But you expressed a wish to fight in Chechnya." "Well, we decided that as a group in Hamburg." "And you went along?" "Yes, Ya Sayyidi, I went along." "We send only our toughest brothers to Chechnya." "I would hope there might also be less strenuous assignments." "All our assignments are strenuous," he said sharply. "Here in Afghanistan, we operate under the authority of the Taliban. They rule the country. We are their Arabian section, and our fighters are the most disciplined, best trained, the most heroic in battles against the American puppets." He glanced at me, looking amused. "If you are interested in laughter and entertainment and beautiful women, you should volunteer for Bosnia." "I would follow your guidance, Ya Sayyidi." I would like to satisfy my duty to jihad in a manner that best suits my talents. Well, remember what God said. Those who strive in our cause, we will guide them along our path. He reached for a paper in front of him. I was impressed by your essay on Caliph Omar. You have a sense of history, Abu Tariq. That is good. And your qualifications are good. On paper. You seem to have special talents. You see, our organization has evolved in recent years. Once we needed only muscular, tough fighters schooled in the Quran, dedicated and disciplined, ready to die in the cause of Allah if need be. Atef cast a sidelong glance at me. We pride ourselves in inspiring young men toward jihad. But after we triumphed over the Russians, our mission widened. Now our struggle extends far beyond these borders. Now we need young men who are just as tough, but who can do more than look down the barrel of a rifle. I'm pretty good with computers, I said. Again, Atef's gaze drifted out the window to the comings and goings on the parade ground outside. After a long pause, he turned back to me. We have known about you for some time, Abu Tariq al-Lubnani, he said at last. At our next meeting, Atef said, you have finished your basic training. We can send you right away to the front lines, or we can put you into elite training. It's up to you. What's involved in elite training? I asked. The usual, the general replied. Motorcycles, machine guns, shoulder-borne missiles, bow guns, techniques of guerrilla warfare. It's training, Abu Tariq, like the best military college in the world. But we must be sure of your commitment. Of course, I said. We are investing a great deal in you. I understand, Ya Sayyidi. We mean to give you a new identity as a true mujahid, and you could be selected for command. Karima, I must have bobbed my head up and down like some African bird because Atef looked at me with disapproval, as if he thought my acquiescence was coming a little too easily. Let me ask you something, Abu Tariq. Do you know what the word Islam means? Not exactly. Faith, I guess. It means surrender to the will of God. God has a plan for you, Abu Tariq. You should never question God's plan. And that's what we're talking about here. Surrender to the will of God and surrender to the goals of this organization. Surrender, I repeated. Yes, you will need to swear a solemn oath. What kind of oath? An oath of loyalty and obedience to the Sheikh himself. Would I get to meet the Sheikh? Yes, and swear a personal oath to him. I had sworn oaths before, Karima, to my parents, as a schoolboy to my country, and to you, my darling, as my Muslim wife, but this was different. Atef continued, the Sheikh has a grand vision for the Islamic world. What is that vision, Ya Sayyidi? I asked. To draw the United States into a life and death confrontation with all Muslims. We gathered with the instructors outside the administration building, its mud walls still pockmarked from the American attacks a year and a half ago. In white and black turbans, we sat cross-legged in rows to await the Sheikh. The morning was gray and cold, and I shivered under my Pashtun turban and the white Saudi thobe. Atta sat next to me, scowling under his prayer cap. As we waited, I surveyed my fellow fighters. They were mainly Afghans, with a sprinkling of Saudis and Yemenis, Bedouins, and a few Berbers. The Africans, in their woolen burnouses, were the best prepared for the morning chill. Eventually, a small caravan of white minivans pulled up, and the Sheikh emerged. It was as if he were a modern-day Saladin coming to greet his warriors before the climactic battle for Jerusalem. He cut an impressive figure against the bleak landscape, with the elegant bearing of a royal and the charisma of a true leader. He was tall, taller by far than most of the men gathered there. He wore a tan camel hair bishtabaya over his dishdasha and a long white shawl over his prayer cap. A line from the Koran popped into my head. It read, "When Allah has blessed you with his bounty, your appearance should reflect it." His beard was long and untrimmed, with a white streak down the middle. It was longer than it needed to be if the sheikh was really emulating the Prophet, for it was said that the Prophet's beard was only 4 fingers in length. As the prince strode by, I noticed the jeweled jambiya stuck in his belt, and I squinted to see if the dagger's handle was made of rhinoceros horn, as I had heard. Muhammad Attaf conducted him to the simple podium that had been set up, and he began to speak against the backdrop of the dreary Kandahar plain, an emptiness interrupted only by camel thorn bushes and mulberry trees. His text that day was verse 9, 120, that it was not becoming for Bedouins and the people of Medina to remain behind Allah's messenger when fighting, and it was not becoming for them to prefer their own lives to his life. He read from the Koran again, "For they will suffer neither thirst nor fatigue nor hunger in the cause of Allah. Surely Allah wastes not the reward for the doers of good." His cadence was slow and deliberate, tinged with sadness. Occasionally he raised his long, bony finger to emphasize a point. He never raised his voice in a harangue, nor lowered it in a whisper. I found myself drifting into a dreamlike state. At the door of an isolated building, Ahmed knocked twice, then knocked a single time. The door opened, and I found myself in an anteroom lit only by candlelight. A group of brothers were playing backgammon. Ahmed mumbled something to one of them in Pashtun, and the guard nodded back, motioning to a side door. At this, Ahmed knocked again, and I was ushered into the presence of the sheikh. Osama bin Laden sat before me on a bank of pillows. He wore a splendid silk robe, and his white prayer cap made his beard seem even larger than before. In his arms he held a small boy, maybe 6 years old, who was obviously quite ill. The sheikh barely acknowledged my presence. He was chewing dates and then putting the mush into the mouth of the sick child. He said my name, Abu Tariq Lubnani. "Do you play volleyball?" I was dumbfounded, speechless. He asked me again if I played volleyball. "Yes," I stammered. "Volleyball is a wonderful game, especially if you live in the desert. They won't let me and Attaf play on the same side because we're taller than everybody else, so we have to be on opposing sides. It has become quite a rivalry." His team had lost to his cousins, he said, and they were playing again the next day, a grudge match. "We're going to play at dawn, at the first glimmer of light," he said, and then he chortled, "in case the Americans are watching. They're big sports fans, you know." I didn't know what to say. "You are a new talent in our camp," he said, "and you're tall. God willing, you will agree to join my side." "Of course," I said, "most happily, Ya Sayyidi. You are most welcome, on my volleyball side and on my caravan." "Thank you, Ya Sayyidi. In fact, we are most pleased to welcome all 4 of you from Hamburg. You are a talented group, and I believe you will be a great credit to the organization. Your generation will be our hope. The future glory of our faith lies in your hands." "We will try not to disappoint you, Ya Sayyidi. Have you met the German?" "Christian Zimmermann?" I asked. "We don't use that name," he replied. "We have named him Ibrahim." The sick boy, he explained, was Ibrahim's son, that he had a severe kidney disease. They needed to find a way to get him to Germany for treatment, or he would die. I said I was very, very sorry to hear that. "Let us not grieve," he responded. "If he should die, the Holy Book tells us that he will live through eternity as a lovable and much-loved boy in paradise, and his father will receive an extra reward in the hereafter for his suffering on earth. We sat there in silence for a while. Occasionally, as he kept feeding the boy in his arms, he glanced up at me and leveled me with a stare. Finally, he said, "Why have you come here tonight?" I told him I was brought at his command. "Did you come of your own free will?" "I did," I said. And then he asked, "For what purpose?" And I said, "To swear my oath to you." But I said I had a question. At that, he was totally silent. I wasn't sure he had heard me, so I repeated, "May I ask you a question about it?" He nodded. "I've heard you were inquisitive, Abu Tariq. There's a phrase at the end, not to disobey my commanders. What is the significance of that?" "That is not complicated," he answered softly. "If I ask you to do something, you will heed and obey me. If I ask someone else to do it, you will not object. You will not ask, 'Why did you assign this task to this individual?' We must remember the holy text. Obey God and all those who are put in authority over you." I started to interrupt, but he raised his hand for silence. "You do not like your companion, Muhammad Atta, I understand." "No, Ya Sayyidi. I had to put that feeling aside," he said, "and I had to put the cause above personal likes and dislikes. But then he told me that he had named Omar as the emir of our group. Omar, our emir! That made me really happy, and I said, 'Good, wonderful.' And then I caught myself. 'Atta will be disappointed,' I said, because I wanted him to know I understood we were a team." He kept looking at me, searching my face, and he said, "Muhammad Atta has spoken well for your group. He has said that you four came to us needing money to satisfy your duty to jihad. You expressed an interest in the Chechnya struggle. You wanted accomplices and training. He spoke to us of you personally, of your love of airplanes and flying. We welcomed his ideas, and we welcome your presence. We will give you money. We will provide you brothers to help. And for you, we will train you to fly airplanes. In return, we demand loyalty and obedience." It was time for him to get the boy back to his father. "Is there anything else?" he said. "Yes," I replied, and stood straight and looked at him. "I pledge before God my obedience to you, Osama bin Laden, to listen and to obey, to carry out both pleasant and unpleasant orders, at good and bad times, and to work selflessly, to obey my commanders, and if necessary to die in the cause of God." He seemed pleased, and he offered me blessings, and then said, "I will see you tomorrow at dawn at the volleyball pitch. Your first assignment will be in the front line as a net man. Remember what the Holy Book says. Those in the front lines of the battle will achieve the upper ranks of paradise." And then he laid the child aside and reached for the bowl of dates across the table. "Would you like a sweet?" When we entered, we were directed to a room in the back where a brother was fiddling with a large television camera. The set was simple: a Kalashnikov rifle resting next to oversized pillows. Against the wall hung the familiar green banner about one God and his messenger. Atta and I sat down together as comrades in arms. From beneath his thobe, he brought out a sheaf of papers and handed them to me. "What's this about?" I asked. "Today we speak to posterity," Atta replied. Certain portions were typed, I noticed, and other portions were scrawled in Atta's calligraphy. "What is this?" I asked more insistently. "You'll see," he said. "I'll go first. Watch how I do it. Then you do the same." I started to object, and then the quiet voice of the sheikh echoed in my brain. "Obey God, the Prophet, and those in authority among you." Praise God, I thought, Omar has replaced Atta as our emir. "Okay, ready to roll," the technician said. "Wait," Atta said. What do you think about the prayer cap? On or off? I don't know, the cameraman said. Is it your signature? Atta pulled the cap down tighter and mugged for the camera. Let's leave it off, the camera guy said. I moved into the shadows to watch. For the next 20 minutes, Atta read his testimony in a monotone. He read fast, his words flat, lifeless, with no inflection given to the emotive parts. His head bobbed up and down between the text and the camera lens. The messages to the scholars, to the poor, to the Muslims, to the people of the Arabian Peninsula, folded one on top of another, without variety. Because his performance was so boring, my mind wandered to the staging. The lighting failed to highlight his best feature, his amazing eyes. I made a mental note to suggest that for my performance, the left side of my face, my better side, be highlighted and the right side backlit in low shadow. I would have to decide whether or not to wear my glasses. At last, praise God, Atta finished. Well, he said, looking at me for approval. That was great, I said. Okay, let's go over your testament. Oh, I almost forgot, the cameraman interrupted. The Sheikh has recorded introductions for your testimonies. Would you like to hear yours, Abu Tariq? I nodded. The color bars came on first, and then the Sheikh's blurry image filled the screen of the small television set on the floor. He began speaking to camera. And not the least, Abu Tariq al-Lubnani, known to us now for his purity and clarity and beauty. From Lebanon, part of Bilad al-Sham, the ancient homeland of the Arab and the believer. The dominion that embraces Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, Jordan, and Iraq, descendant of Abu Ubaidah bin al-Jarrah. One of the Prophet's 10 companions, famous for his modesty and bravery, who was promised paradise, commander of armies under the Caliph Omar. May God be pleased with Abu Tariq and accept his gift of good deed. I frowned and looked at Atta as if to say, what's this all about? But he averted his glance and kept his eyes fixed on the text in front of him. Abu Tariq's presentation is much shorter, Atta called out to the cameraman. Okay. What have you got here? I said, testy-like, reaching for his papers. I read the first part slowly, whispering each word as I went, trying to act as if I was rehearsing. The script read, I spent my adolescence cheap. I did not do that because I was running away from the hardships of life, as they allege. I ate the best food and drank the best drink. I lived in a fancy house and rode around in fancy cars. I had lovely women as my companions. My parents supported me with money for the best schools. With my parents' intercession, I also had the special advantage to take a tempting job. But I asked myself, now what? I ran away from the tyrants and their easy jobs and left for the jihad at the height of my manhood and in the name of God. When we have this duty on our shoulders and the duty is in our conscience and the God Almighty says, whoever wants life on earth and covets its attractions, then his deeds will be rewarded on earth. But those same people will be condemned in hellfire in the hereafter for what they did and the chaos they created. I looked up. Who wrote this stuff? I asked. Omar, Atta answered. Did he write all of it? No, not all, Atta replied. It was a collaborative effort. Okay, let's get the 8th message out of the way. Can I do several takes? I asked. As the camera focused, I mouthed the words of the 8th message slowly. And then I read it again. In the second reading, I thought of my father, forever generous and dying now, and of my mother, hard-working and long-suffering, and my 2 sisters, struggling to find themselves as nurses and social workers in service to humanity. And you, my love. Okay, let's try it, I said. I read, looking into the lens of the camera, serious and sincere. Oh, Father and Mother, I'm joining the jihad so that I can meet the face of God. Maybe you are hurting, but I will rejoice with you tomorrow. To my father I say, consider your son's deed in the service of God and his pledge to follow the example of the prophet Suleiman, who said, I will visit 90 women, and each of them will bear a child for the sake of God. And to you, mother, be like Al-Kansa, the poet and friend of the prophet, whose 4 sons were killed in the battle of Qadisiyah, and who did not grieve, but said, Praise be to Allah, who honored me with their martyrdom. Good, Ada said. See, you didn't miss a word. Now the 9th message. To buy time, I said, how do I look in glasses? Let's try this one without, the camera guy said. I turned back to the script and I read. I do what I do because the grandchildren of monkeys and pigs among the Jews and Christians committed outrages against Muslim women. I do what I do because those who came before me have failed to drive the infidels from the Arabian Peninsula. The great idol of the modern age, America, has suppressed us and humiliated our pride and ridiculed our religion and desecrated our honor. I do what I do to let America know that soldiers of God are coming. Its demise is near. Let us not be fooled by the state of false grandeur it is in, for God is our ally, and there is no ally for us but God. Atta looked at me, waiting for my praise of his work. I like the part about the grandchildren of monkeys and pigs, I said. He scowled. Okay, let's do the obligatory. I read the last typed paragraph mechanically. I had become a machine, Karima.